The Bible is the written word that God, revealing himself in human history, has made to resound through time, through the words of the prophets, Jesus and the apostles. A world without boundaries between history and law, science and prayer. In Jerusalem, the celebration of the Feast of Tabernacles, which lasts 7 days. It is a remembrance of the Jews' stay in the huts in the Sinai desert. Al-Mansoura was an Arab Maronite Christian village located in the Upper Galilee. Efforts to rebuild the Church of John the Baptist. The community of San Lorenzo RUIZ, the first Filipino saint, celebrated its feast day on the 27th anniversary of the founding of the community at Ratisbon Monastery in Jerusalem. The message of the prophets and the tradition of the sages and scribes did not remain pure oral expression for long, but soon began to be put in writing. The process is long and begins with the engravings in stone and clay, and for many centuries fixed in manuscripts. The Bible is the written word that God, revealing himself in human history, allowed to resound through time, through the words of the prophets, Jesus and the apostles. The history of God's people begins with a call to Abraham to leave his homeland and a promise: "I will make you a great people." On Mount Sinai, God reveals himself to Moses. Sinai was the setting where the covenant between God and his people was made. A rabbinic Jewish tradition teaches that the oral law was also transmitted along with the written one by God to Moses on Mount Sinai. For centuries, oral and written tradition have been intertwined in the history of Israel. The first 5 books of the Bible make up a set that Jews considered central to their religious experience, the Torah. In the Christian Bible, these 5 books make up the Pentateuch, the 5 scrolls: Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. God, the inspirer and author of the books of the Old and New Testaments, has wisely arranged that the new should be hidden in the Old, and the Old should become clear in the New. After having spoken many times and in various ways in the prophets, God has also spoken through his Son. Jesus left us very simple stories and parables, understandable by everyone, both the fishermen of Galilee and the scribes of Jerusalem. His disciples have passed on to us the testimony of his life through the gospel. Since the 2nd century, church tradition has attributed the Gospels to St. Matthew, St. Mark, St. Luke, and St. John, respectively. The first 3 Gospels are called synoptic because they are very similar to each other. The doctrine of Jesus takes shape in the other books of the New Testament, the letters of St. Paul and other sacred authors, and the Apocalypse. These writings contain the reflections of the first Christians on the life and message of Jesus. Through his writings, and especially through his life, the Apostle Paul extended the boundaries of the Church to all peoples. And Jesus worked the marvelous covering, so that one can not only hear but also see. He spoke of the shepherd who has lost his sheep, of the sower who has sown the seed in different soils, of the prodigal son who had wandered away from home, and the listeners immediately understood that it was about them, lost sheep, seeds that should have borne fruit, children sought by the Father's love. The Bible is a world without boundaries, even for research, history and law, science and prayer, According to the Catholic canon, the Bible consists of 73 books, compiled over a span of 15 centuries.
La Bibbia, questo complesso di libri, ha due autori.
The Bible, this complex of books, has two authors, the divine author, who is God himself, and the human author, who are the hagiographers, the writers. God, as the divine author, has inspired, has assisted the intelligence, the will, the executive faculties, that is, what makes a writer such, and the human author put the word in writing with their literary genius. In words and deeds they are, so to speak, crystallized, stopped in writing, and constitute what we call the Bible.
E costituiscono quello che noi chiamiamo la Bibbia.
The scriptures evolved through the earliest transmissions of the texts made by copyists who remained faithful and cared for the texts themselves.
Lo studio del numero stragrande, enorme di manoscritti conservati.
From the study of the many manuscripts that have been preserved and from different times, we can see that there is a great fidelity and a very careful care in transmitting the text as it is. One thinks that in thousands of manuscripts of the New Testament, the variants that touch the sense can be counted on the fingers of one hand. So the sense of the text is never touched. The variants sometimes concern a simple word, a verbal form, or the substitution of a certain term, but never the substance of the text.
Oppure la sostituzione di un determinato termine, ma mai la sostanza del testo. Come credente io penso che senza dubbio.
As a faithful believer, I think that without a doubt there was the assistance of providence that did not allow the texts of the faith to be lost. Also the human side, the care of the early Christian communities. Next week we will present the second part of this series on the Bible with translations of the texts done by St. Jerome. Jerusalem is witnessing in these days the Jewish celebration of the Feast of Tabernacles. In Hebrew, SUKKOT, it lasts for 7 days. This feast commemorates the Jews' stay in huts or tabernacles in the Sinai desert for 40 years after their exodus from Egypt under the leadership of the prophet Moses. We read in Leviticus, "And the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, Speak unto the children of Israel, saying, The 15th day of this 7th month shall be the Feast of Tabernacles for 7 days." Religious Jews purchase the 4 varieties of fronds, a sprig of palm, small branches of willow and myrtle, and a cedar to be used in rituals and prayers of thanksgiving during the 7 days of the festival.
شو السفر اللي بيقرأوا اليهود بعيد العرش السفر اللي
What book do Jews read on the Feast of Tabernacles that is perfect for this holiday? It's a universal journey from the books of wisdom, Qohelet, vanity of vanities. We need to be aware that this life is a time we are going through. It is like a tent, it is not something solid. This holiday is tied to this spirituality. The huts are placed on open balconies, rooftops, or near the house. Their walls are usually made of wood and covered with palm fronds. Inside they are decorated with beautiful ornaments. There the family eats their meals during the whole week of the festival, and some of them even stay overnight. The Feast of Tabernacles is one of the feasts that Jews celebrated until the year 70 DC with a collective pilgrimage to the temple in Jerusalem. It was considered a great feast because all the people could go on pilgrimage to the temple after finishing the harvest, and in this there was an otherworldly dimension.
في سفر زكريا بالفصل 14 معناته عندنا
In the book of Zechariah in chapter 14, for us and for the Jews, the Feast of Tabernacles becomes an eschatological feast. Recently, with the celebration of the feast, not only the Jewish people will come to Jerusalem, but all peoples and nations do to worship God, the creator of the world, the true God.
الشعوب وكل الأمم جايين عشان يعبدوا الله خالق العالم الإله الحقيقي.
But where is the Christian Feast of Tabernacles, since the Christian calendar is derived from biblical feasts such as Passover and Christian Easter, but with different meanings?
6 آب عندنا عيد كبير.
On August the 6th, we have a great feast. It's the Feast of Transfiguration, and I remember the Transfiguration scene because there are references. Remember that the Jews lived 40 years in the desert. Now count 40 days from August the 6th to September the 14th, when we have a great feast, the Feast of the Exaltation of the Cross. This is our tent. We must be in the shadow of the cross. We have arrived at the feast.
وصلنا للعيد.
The first day of the Jewish Feast of Tabernacles is an official holiday, while the other 7 days of the feast are considered less special days in terms of prayer. As for the feast that concludes the Jewish month of Tishri, it is the feast of the revelation of Torah, SUKKOT Torah, the joy of Torah, and will fall next week on the last day of SUKKOT.
Are you sure these are the village stones? Is this the church? Too bad. When did it turn into a forest like this?
The village stands steadily with its sky and land above all titles and seasonal political variables, in the same way that the olive trees remain steady in it. And it is no coincidence that Mrs. Miriam Matar came to visit her hometown, the abandoned village of Al-Mansoura, for the first time in 73 years.
يا خسارة عليك يا كنيسة، يا خسارة، هيك صرتي؟
What a loss this church is. What a pity. How did it get this way? Too bad. Too bad. Too bad. My goodness, they made every effort to build it.
يا حرام، حطوا دم قلبهم تعمروها.
Al-Mansoura is an Arab Maronite Christian village located in the Upper Galilee, and its people dislocated in 1948. Their life revolved around the Church of St. John the Baptist, which was the spiritual, social, educational and cultural center for them.
بال 1888 اجى حنا مطر ونشر ارض بالمنصورة وهو تقريبا.
In the year 1888, Hannah Matar bought a land in Al-Mansoura and died 12 years later. That is in the year 1900. At that time, she had 6 children, and the village of Al-Mansoura was built on approximately 2,500 acres. Basically, the picture here shows the dome which no longer exists today. Here we can see the whole church, as well as the icon of St. John the Baptist, this altar where the Blessed Sacrament is kept. And here we also see the church from the inside. Thank God we were able to find many photos and post them here. Many efforts have been made also referring to various books and historical and geographical sources of local historians, Orientalists and missionary fathers, as well as many interviews that have shaken many memories preserved in the hearts of many villagers, to collect and compile them into a book that bears the name of the village.
شوف الكنيسة قديش كانت حلوة وجميلة.
I look at the church and how beautiful it was. My mother told me that my brother and I used to play here in our childhood. But where did we play? There was a well laid out concrete ground. My mother sold all her gold, and she had a lot of it. Her grandmother loved her very much, being the first granddaughter of the family, and bought her a lot of gold. So my mother sold everything to build a house. They made every effort to build a church. It's well built, isn't it? But it's relatively small, because the village had a small population. They were all cousins.
وكانوا كلهم أولاد العم خي البي.
العائلة هاي تشردت
This family has left for all parts of the world, but they still feel a sense of belonging and a beautiful memory of the history and heritage they have experienced here.
عاشوا بهذا المكان.
Father Majdi Hashul, together with author Shukri Araf and Professor Iskandar Atia, are contributing to the transfer of heritage to the younger generation. With a book that bears the name of the village, they are giving hope for the return of families to their village and for the reconstruction of a long-awaited church. The community of San Lorenzo RUIZ gathered with joy and pride on September the 19th at the Salesian monastery of Ratisbon in Jerusalem on the occasion of the Feast of St. Lorenzo RUIZ. He is the first Filipino saint, and this is the 27th anniversary of the founding of the community named after him.
I'm happy to be with the Filipino community here in Israel as we celebrate the feast of our first patron saint, St. Lorenzo RUIZ de Manila, as he gave his life completely to the Lord. And this inspired me as well to share in full joy my life to the Lord.
Lorenzo RUIZ was born in Manila in 1594. He served as an altar boy, married, had 3 children, carried out missionary work, and was martyred in Japan in 1637. Despite being subjected to much torture, he refused to abandon Christianity, saying, "I am a Catholic and I accept death for God from the bottom of my heart. If I had 1,000 lives, I would give them all to God." In 1987, Pope John Paul II proclaimed him a saint.
The spirituality of the saint is simplicity of life, and his spirituality is loving or embracing our faith in the midst of death. San Lorenzo RUIZ image, he is bringing with the Bible and the Rosary, because San Lorenzo RUIZ is a catechist, a simple catechist from Manila.
The solemn Mass that took place in the forecourt of the monastery was presided over by the new Apostolic Nuncio for Israel and Cyprus, an Apostolic Delegate for Jerusalem and Palestine, Monsignor Adolfo Tito Iana. It was concelebrated by numerous priests in the presence of a large number of members of the Filipino community of San Lorenzo, composed for the most part of foreign workers.
Well, the Filipino community here in Jerusalem, most of them are caregivers working here in Jerusalem and nearby places. We create community to have our spiritual support, and every Sunday we gather together to celebrate the Holy Eucharist of the Mass here in Ratisbon Monastery. And it's like a family.
I am very glad, I am very happy to celebrate the 27th year anniversary of the San Lorenzo RUIZ community. And I am very happy to attend the first Filipino Mass of the Nuncio here in the Holy Land.
Monsignor Adolfo Tito Iana, also of Filipino heritage, in his homily called on those present to live the faith with firmness and humility despite the challenges, just as St. Lorenzo RUIZ did. He then quoted the words spoken by Pope John Paul II on the occasion of his beatification. He said that the full meaning of this beatification was to encourage Christians in the Far East to spread the word of the Lord. Monsignor Adolfo Tito Iana added that regardless of one's origin or humble conditions, a baptized person can reach the heights of holiness and perfection in response to Christ's call, "Be perfect, as your heavenly Father is perfect." At the end of the Mass, and after blessings were imparted to those present, the Apostolic Delegate addressed them personally, expressing his pride. He said that Filipino Catholics declare their faith and profess it wherever they are in various parts of the world. After taking the commemorative photos, the celebrants spent a moment of fraternity together with the faithful.